Hello and welcome everybody to another Books and Bytes deep dive.
Hello, great to be here.
Today we're plunging into Barbara W. Tuchman's critically acclaimed Stilwell and the American Experience in China, 1911-45.
Yeah, this is a big one. And it's not just, a standard biography. It's really a profound look at this huge chunk of history, a pivotal half century, all seen through the eyes of one really extraordinary and, let's be honest, often exasperating military figure, General Joseph W. Stilwell.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack his unique, sometimes cantankerous personality, his deep, deep frustrations, but also his, well, equally profound affection for the Chinese people, especially the common soldier.
Right. We'll get into the huge challenges of foreign intervention in China, which were immense, and the politics, the incredibly complex dynamics of Chinese politics at the time, plus the strategic dilemmas, that define the China-Burma-India theater during World War II.
Exactly. Ultimately, you'll understand how this one man's relentless push for military efficiency, for just getting things done, clashed head-on with these deeply entrenched cultural and political realities, and how that clash fundamentally shaped the whole American experience in China. It's a story, well, it's packed with surprising facts and some pretty tough truths.
It really is. It gets to that eternal gap, doesn't it, between the policymakers sitting far away, maybe in Washington, and the gritty, often brutal reality happening on the ground. And Stilwell, he was right there living it.
So let's start at the very beginning of this journey. Stilwell himself, he was pure Yankee stock, you could say, tracing his family way back to 1638.
Wow, that far back.
Yeah, and his father had this fascinatingly unusual career path. Tried lumber, eventually became a doctor, but then, kind of ironically, never actually practiced medicine.
Huh. Interesting family background.
And young Joseph, or Warren as he was known then, he went to West Point. His principal initially called him a model boy, which turned out to be maybe a bit optimistic given the demerits he started racking up pretty early on.
Right, so that independent, maybe slightly rebellious streak, it was there from the start, it seems.
Definitely. And his early experiences abroad, they really seemed to set the stage for everything that came later. After West Point, he was organizing athletics over in the Philippines.
Okay.
But that role couldn't quite contain his restlessness. He found himself really eager to go beyond the seas, as Tuchman puts it, for language immersion, even when he was back instructing at the academy.
So it wasn't just about seeing the world for him. It was this deeper drive for, genuine practical engagement with other cultures and maybe escaping some of the military bureaucracy back home.
I think that's exactly it. And you can really see Stilwell's core beliefs starting to harden during his very first tour in China, which was 1911 to 1913.
Right, just as the Qing dynasty was collapsing, a pivotal time.
Hugely pivotal. And this period was so formative for him, it cemented this profound sympathy with the common man. The workers, the farmers, just everyday people. But, and this is striking, he developed a really unfavorable opinion of Chinese officials pretty quickly.
What did he see that caused that?
Well, he observed widespread poverty everywhere. Beggars, filthy canals, the extreme coolie labor, this incredibly harsh manual work for tiny pay, this direct exposure to the stark realities, the corruption, the suffering. It just shaped this distinct perspective he carried for his whole life. He even noted little cultural details like the zigzag bridges built to supposedly thwart evil spirits. Shows his keen eye.
And it's so important to understand the China he stepped into then. This wasn't a fully sovereign nation in the way we think of it now. Foreign pressure was immense.
Explain that a bit. Extraterritoriality.
Yeah, extraterritoriality was widespread. Basically, foreigners were often exempt from Chinese law within certain designated areas, the concessions. Foreign powers had carved out these spheres of interest, effectively dividing the country economically and politically. There was serious talk, pervasive talk, really, of China being outright partitioned.
Like carving it up completely.
Exactly. And early Chinese efforts at self-strengthening, trying to adopt Western methods, Western technology, they faced huge resistance from conservative elements within their own Manchu government.
So this external pressure, the internal resistance, it created this potent brew, right? Fueling Chinese nationalism.
Definitely. A major spark was Japan's victory over Russia in 1905. That showed an Asian power could defeat a European one, which was huge psychologically. Then things like the U.S. Exclusion Act of 1904, sparring Chinese workers, sparked massive boycotts in Chinese cities.
Right. Anger against the foreign powers, but also against the ruling Qing dynasty, the Manchus, for being weak.
Precisely. It was all boiling over. And then, almost miraculously, the 1911 revolution kicks off, eventually leading to the rise of figures like Yuan Shikai and the end, finally, of imperial rule.
It must have been an absolute tumultuous time to be there, eye-opening for a young American officer.
Absolutely. And Stilwell had some pretty striking encounters that Tuchman notes heightened his imagination. Like he learned about locals in some areas eating the hearts or livers of executed pirates.
Whoa, why?
The belief, apparently, was that consuming these organs would prevent the pirate spirit from reincarnating, ensure they were truly gone. It's grim, for sure, but it paints this picture of a society where ancient beliefs and desperate measures were just deeply intertwined in ways totally alien to his background.
Okay, so let's move forward a bit. World War I comes along. Stillwell ends up in France as an intelligence officer.
But he wasn't exactly thrilled with the desk job, was he?
Not at all. Immensely frustrated. He called himself a damned waffle-tailed clerk, just hated the inefficiency and what he saw as favoritism. He even coined the term peanut club for commissioned millionaires and politicians who he felt got cushy non-combat jobs while regular soldiers did the real work.
Really solidified his disdain for privilege and incompetence. Classic Stilwell.
And he even pulled off this humorous prank during that time, inventing a fake German gas expert named Otto Schmierkiasse.
Otto Schmierkiasse, seriously?
Yep, completely fabricated. But this fictional expert apparently took on a life of its own within the intelligence circles. Shows his dry wit, even when he was completely fed up.
That's pretty funny. But while he's dealing with that, the end of WWI is having massive repercussions back in China, right? The Versailles Treaty.
Huge. Specifically, the treaty granted Japan Germany's former concessions in Shantung province. And this just ignited outrage across China.
It wasn't just about territory. It felt like a betrayal by the Western powers, a direct slap in the face to Chinese sovereignty. And it fueled the May 4th movement, this massive student-led nationalist protest demanding reform and resistance to foreign imperialism.
Solidify that anti-Japanese feeling even more. Radicalized a whole generation.
Exactly. So after the war, Stilwell heads back to China in 1920, this time for serious language training.
Which must have been incredibly difficult. Chinese is not an easy language.
Formidable challenge, yeah. He immersed himself in Peking, and it gave him this unique vantage point again. Seeing the stark contrast between, as Tuchman describes it, the charmed, hedonistic existence of many foreigners living in luxury and the raw wants of China, the daily struggle for survival faced by most people.
That constant contrast must have kept fueling his critical views.
For sure. And what's really fascinating about this period is Stilwell getting hands-on involved in road-building projects in Shanxi province.
Actual practical work?
Exactly. These weren't just engineering jobs. They were practical attempts to alleviate famine by improving transportation, getting grain from areas with surplus to areas suffering shortages. He saw firsthand the success of a local strongman, Yan Shishan, who had developed his province with really practical things like irrigation and literacy programs.
Which stood in stark contrast to the chaos elsewhere under the central government.
Big time. It just reinforced his belief in practical, get-your-hands-dirty leadership rather than just slogans and bureaucracy.
And we see a more personal side, too. He preferred family time over the expat social scene.
Yeah. Tuchman mentions he preferred teaching his own kids to mingling at parties. And he made these somber observations, too, like visiting opium dens and seeing poor laborers, the coolies, spending a huge chunk of their tiny wages just to dull hunger and escape their reality. Underscored the deep social problems he was seeing. Politically, this was the warlord era, right? Just chaos.
Total chaos. A power vacuum filled by competing military strongmen. Eventually, the nationalists started to rise, led by figures like Eugene Chen, who was known for his, quote, consuming hatred of the foreigner.
And there was this Western delusion, as Tuchman calls it, that China's struggle for sovereignty was automatically a struggle for Western-style democracy.
But that wasn't necessarily the goal for many Chinese nationalists. It was about unity, getting rid of foreign influence, self-determination on their own terms, not necessarily Jeffersonian democracy.
Right, so Stilwell gets back to Tientsin, rejoins the 15th Infantry. What was life like there?
Kind of insulated, it sounds like. A bit of an American bubble contrasting with the reality outside. He noted a high venereal disease rate in the regiment, kind of a side effect of bored soldiers far from home. And there was even this funny linguistic confusion with their uniform patch. It was supposed to say Chungku, meaning middle country, or China, but it just said Chung, which alone just means middle.
A small thing, but maybe highlights that cultural disconnect.
Perhaps. Then things got serious with the Nanking incident in 1927, a violent episode where foreign homes were attacked.
Right, anti-foreign sentiment boiling over again. U.S. Marines were deployed?
They were. But amidst that chaos, Stilwell apparently witnessed and deeply respected a Chinese man who courageously stood up for a foreigner being attacked. That act of bravery really impressed him. And his own escape from Lunghai during that period, facing real danger, highlighted what Tuchman calls his higher courage, that willingness to act decisively, selflessly when things got tough.
Okay, and it's around this time, or maybe a bit later, that he gets that famous nickname, right? Vinegar Joe.
Exactly. It really came out of his teaching style back in the States at Fort Benning. He was helping General Marshall, future Chief of Staff, Secretary of State, huge figure reform the military curriculum there.
And he wasn't exactly gentle about it.
Not at all. Blunt, sarcastic, impatient, known for demanding standards and really cutting remarks. Apparently, he even had a formidable list of his own faults that he'd readily acknowledge. And despite the Army supposedly being nonpartisan, it was openly anti-Roosevelt.
Wow, so it's just completely unapologetic about who he was and what he thought.
That's the picture Tuchman paints.
Yeah.
A man of strong opinions, take it or leave it.
Meanwhile, while Stilla is shaking things up at Benning, Japan's aggression in Asia is just escalating, right?
Relentlessly. They launched the Manchurian Adventure in 1931, basically invading and occupying a huge part of China. Then came the Mao Doctrine in 1934, where Japan just boldly claimed the right to be the guardian of peace and order in East Asia.
Which was basically a flimsy excuse for more expansionism.
Totally. And America's response? Pretty cautious. The U.S. was preoccupied with the Great Depression, domestic issues, and there was this strong desire to avoid getting dragged into another major conflict.
Understandable, but maybe short-sighted in retrospect.
Well, Stilwell seemed to see it coming. By 1935, in an internal Army report called Future Developments in China, his analysis was remarkably prescient. He clearly laid out Japan's sweeping imperial ambitions across Asia, basically predicting the road to war.
He saw it.
He did. And Tuchman captures his poignant reflection when he returned to China shortly after. Not so good now, plenty of time in front. He knew, with this chilling clarity that many in Washington seemed to lack, that a major conflict was brewing and China was right on the front lines.
That ability to see the hard truth, even when it was unpleasant, that's such a key part of his story. And it really sets the stage for his wartime role. As the Sino-Japanese War properly ignites, how does Stilwell view Chiang Kai-shek's leadership?
Scathingly, to put it mildly. He saw Chiang's generalship as politically motivated and militarily contemptible, particularly how unprepared the nationalists were for fighting a first-class power like Japan. He was just exasperated by Chiang focusing on superficial things, like new clubs and slogans, "Don't spit on the floor," was apparently won, instead of genuine military reforms and, well, actual fighting.
So optics over substance, in Stilwell's view.
Pretty much. The Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937 really kicks off the full-scale war, and it's followed swiftly by Japanese brutality that was just horrific, intentionally targeting universities, massacres of unarmed soldiers, civilians.
Just brutal. And in contrast to the nationalist army's struggles, the communist guerrillas started using different tactics.
Yeah, their guerrilla tactics began to emerge. And Stilwell, ever the military professional, took a real interest. He didn't just dismiss them as Marxists. He saw them as an indigenous product of the ancient wrongs of China, a response born out of centuries of exploitation and suffering. He recognized their effectiveness on the ground, whatever their ideology.
That's a very pragmatic view.
It was. The horrors just kept coming, though. The fall of Nanking, infamous for its atrocities. The Panay incident, where the Japanese bombed a U.S. gunboat on the Yangtze River.
And Stilwell's reaction to the apology.
Classic Vinegar Joe. Tuchman quotes his diary. "Japs apologize. Very sorry for you. Couldn't see the insignia. The bastards." No mincing words there.
Definitely not. And his frustration with the Chinese army's own issues continued.
Constantly. He called their replacement system cockeyed, just totally inefficient and illogical. He saw a ghastly failure to use China's huge manpower effectively. His conclusion, repeated often, was that the Chinese soldier is excellent material, wasted and betrayed by stupid leadership.
A recurring theme, that gap between the potential of the ordinary soldier and the failures of the command structure.
Absolutely. And then there was the Yellow River Dikes incident in 1938, a really desperate move by the Chinese.
They deliberately breached the dikes.
Yes, to slow the Japanese advance. Caused immense flooding, terrible human suffering, but Tuchman notes it did buy China about 3 crucial months, a devastating strategic choice.
Wow. Meanwhile, back in America, how was China generally viewed?
Often through a kind of romanticized lens. influenced by maybe a century of missionary work. It led to this overpraised image of the Chiangs, especially Madame Chiang Kai-shek, who was very skilled in shaping American public opinion.
But Stilwell was seeing the reality on the ground.
Exactly. And he grappled constantly with that huge gap between the public perception back home and the grim, often corrupt reality he was dealing with daily.
His own career kept moving forward, though. Brigadier General in 39.
Yeah. And he had that memorable quip about the role of the horse in Chinese warfare.
Oh, yeah.
Good eating if you're hungry. Typical Stilwell, dry, pragmatic wit. He also apparently took some satisfaction in finally outranking his old boss at military intelligence, a guy named McCabe. Shows his sometimes contentious side.
Always keeping score, maybe.
Seems like it sometimes. Now, as the world is sliding towards global war, the U.S. military itself wasn't really ready, was it?
No, largely unprepared for what was coming.
But Stilwell threw himself into training. He was battling this thing called the Ohio Movement that stood for Over the Hill in October. Draftees trying to desert before winter training hit.
Huh. So he had to whip them into shape.
With strict, but apparently very effective maneuvers, he got results.
And then came his really critical wartime mission, command of Allied forces in Burma.
Right. His initial assessment. He called the whole situation a gamble. And Chiang's demands for American aid were just off the charts. Stilwell described it as like asking for 500 stars. Utterly unrealistic given the logistics.
Setting the stage for conflict right there.
And then came the defining, really harrowing moment of that campaign. The walkout from Burma.
After the defeat by the Japanese, they had to trek out through the jungle.
A grueling 140-mile trek. Stilwell, showing real leadership, addressed his mixed group of American, British, Chinese, Burmese personnel, insisting on strict discipline even in retreat. And famously, he smashed his radio, sent his last defiant message. No occasion for worry. Cheerio. Then smashed it. A visceral act, cutting off external command, taking absolute control of his small, exhausted group, making sure they walked out as a disciplined unit, not a rabble.
Incredible story. And when he reached India,
he immediately set about training Chinese troops at a place called Ramgarh. And this was genuinely transformational. American medics drastically cut the death rates among the Chinese soldiers, who'd suffered terribly from disease and neglect under their own system.
making a real difference.
Huge difference. And Stilwell even made American air crews live in the mud with the troops for a bit.
Seriously? Why?
To make them understand the grim reality on the ground, so they'd be absolutely committed to ensuring those vital supply drops were consistent. No excuses. He also noted, with a bit of a dig, the British surprise at seeing American colonels actually working.
A little jab at the perceived British class system or formality.
Probably. But behind the scenes, the political maneuvering was intense. The Chinese government apparently went to great lengths to smother Wendell Willkie, the American politician who visited China, basically control his access and narrative to influence U.S. public opinion favorably.
Managing the message.
Exactly. And there was that constant growing tension between Stilwell, focused on building effective ground forces to retake Burma, and General Claire Chennault, who championed air power as the key. A fundamental strategic disagreement that just caused endless friction.
Two strong personalities, different priorities.
Big time. And the deeper issues, the corruption and indifference Stilwell railed against, really came to the surface during the Honan famine in 1943.
What happened there?
Stilwell observed local Chinese officials collecting grain taxes from peasants who were literally starving to death. A truly horrific sight. He concluded the peasants' loyalty to the nationalist government had been hollowed to nothingness by that kind of exploitation.
Just devastating. And it highlighted that eternal gap he talked about.
Perfectly. The gap between policymakers in Washington, maybe getting the rosy picture from Madame Chiang, and the grim reality Stilwell was seeing. The deep corruption and detachment he was constantly fighting.
These strategic debates played out at the highest levels too, like the Cairo Conference in 1943.
Oh, yeah. Churchill strongly opposed a major Burma campaign, wanting resources elsewhere. Stilwell was furious about what he called the 50 million gold squeeze corruption linked to building airfields for Chennault's forces. And Treasury Secretary Morgenthau, seeing the financial dealings, just bluntly called the Chinese officials involved a bunch of damn crooks.
Wow. The frustration was palpable even at that level.
Absolutely. But despite all the infighting, the Burma campaign did eventually achieve a major success with the capture of Meet Kina in May 1944.
A crucial victory. Validated Stilwell's ground strategy, didn't it?
It did. A really hard-fought win. And Stilwell marked it in his diary with a jubilant whoops. And then this classic Stilwell thought, Will this burn up the limeys?
Aw, still keeping score with the British even in victory.
Totally. A testament to his combative spirit, his rivalries. It was a victory against the Japanese, sure, but also felt like a victory against all the bureaucratic and political obstacles he faced constantly.
But ultimately, that combative spirit, that bluntness, led to the final clash with Chiang Kai-shek, right? The breakdown was unavoidable.
It seemed inevitable. Stilwell's personality was a huge factor. Even General Marshall, his supporter, believed Stilwell was often his own worst enemy. The breaking point came in a critical meeting with Chiang. Stilwell delivered what he called a bundle of paprika, basically a direct, unvarnished, and terrible indictment of Chiang's army and its leadership, laying bare all the failures.
How did Chiang react?
Calmly, eerily calmly, according to Tuchman. He just said, "I understand." And that effectively sealed Stilwell's fate in China.
So Chiang demanded his recall.
Yes. Despite Marshall fighting hard to keep him there, Chiang insisted. It became a major diplomatic issue. The New York Times ran an article framing the recall as a political triumph of a moribund, anti-democratic regime, reflecting that growing negative perception of China's government back in the U.S.
So how was Stilwell received when he got back to the States?
With little glory and no thanks, as Tuchman puts it. A really bitter end to such an incredibly draining and difficult assignment, especially since his task was called by some the most difficult assigned to any American in the entire war.
His peers felt he just did the dirty work.
Yeah, the feeling was it was doing a job for Uncle Joe, like he was the guy who took on the impossible tasks nobody else wanted. But a Chinese colleague offered a more insightful take, noting that for years, Stilwell had somehow made things possible out of impossibilities.
There was some vindication later, though, with the Stilwell Road.
Yes, a posthumous validation, really. The vital supply route he had championed, sought tooth and nail for, connecting India and China through that incredibly tough terrain, was eventually opened in 1945 and named after him. His picture was featured alongside Chiang and Roosevelt at the opening ceremony. A tangible legacy.
Even near the end of his life, in 1946, his views on China remained sharp.
Oh yeah, still Vinegar Joe. He famously said regarding Marshall's difficult post-war mission to China, "Marshall can't walk on water." A blunt acknowledgement of the sheer intractability of the problems, even for his respected mentor.
And he still wished he was in the thick of it.
Absolutely, he said, "It makes me itch to throw down my shovel and get into the dirt." That enduring desire for direct action, for getting things done, frustrated by inaction, it never left him.
He died in 1946, and that famous quote of his.
I claim we took a hell of a beating. It became symbolic of his whole persona, didn't it? That tough-mindedness, that absolute refusal to sugarcoat reality, even when the reality was defeat or immense difficulty. It summed up his honesty, even if that honesty often rubbed people the wrong way.
A complex and challenging figure, no doubt.
Absolutely. Which I think raises a really important question for all of us listening. As we've seen here, the American experience in China during those decades was just this incredibly tangled web. Military strategy, cultural misunderstandings, political maneuvering. What enduring lessons can we actually draw from Stilwell's unwavering, often ignored observations about leadership, about that gap between policy made from afar and the reality on the ground, about the immense difficulty, maybe impossibility, of imposing external solutions on deeply complex internal problems?
That's the core of it, isn't it?
It really is. Maybe think about how understanding these historical dynamics, these clashes of personality and policy, might shed light on contemporary challenges in international relations, and maybe even on our own and during quests for real knowledge, for truth. In a world just overflowing with information, where figuring out what's actually happening on the ground can be just as hard as it was for Stilwell back then.